So my focus at Manchester is shipping, the pollution from ships and what you can do about it. So people might think that ships is a bit removed from your everyday life. But if you think about your house, everything in it, pretty much everything in it, your chairs, your telly, your laptop, bananas, your clothes, they'll all got there at some point by ship. So hopefully this will move a slide on. This is one of the biggest ships in the world. It's the Ever Given. It's the one that got caught in the Suez Canal. You might have seen in the news before. Absolutely a massive thing. Might not think how big it is looking at that, although it's pretty large. But if you were to drop it in the middle of Shipley, then it would stretch from Asda to about platform 5 at the train station. So it's a really colossal thing. And there are loads of these. There are about 95,000 ships in the world, not all as big as that, admittedly. But they're big ships, and they all run on oil, very dirty oil, so they all pollute the environment quite a lot. So my research is about what you can do about shipping's pollution. And every year, the ships that are going round the oceans and the seas, they put out 1 billion tonnes, that's 1,000 million tonnes of carbon dioxide into the air. Now, you might remember Kat last week was talking about greenhouse gases and how the more we put them into the atmosphere, the more the planet heats up, the more our climate changes. So shipping is a small part of this problem, but it's an important one. Numbers like 1,000 million tonnes, I don't know about you, but numbers like that don't mean a lot to me. I need something else to think about them. So that's why I've got these toilet rolls here with me. So this, for the purposes of my presentation, represents 1,000 million tonnes. So that's shipping's contribution to climate change right now. On the table here, I've got another 35 toilet rolls because the total carbon dioxide pollution, I'm only going to talk about carbon dioxide today because, as Kat mentioned, there's other greenhouse gases, but I'm just focusing on one to keep it simple. And shipping's mostly carbon dioxide anyway. But, so there's 36 billion tonnes, 36 toilet rolls, and what we need to do, as Kat was saying last week, was cut that in half in the next 10 or so years and then get it to zero as quickly as possible after that. So 36 toilet rolls. Which fuels do you think are the most important in terms of producing the carbon dioxide? Someone shout one out. Yeah, fuel, something you burn. Yeah, diesel, so oil is in second place, 11 billion tonnes. You think another one? Coal is number 1. So coal, we use coal mostly for 2 reasons, for producing electricity and for using in heavy industry to make things, so in steel manufacture, for example. Oil, we usually use it to burn it to transport things, so planes, ships, cars, lorries, vans, the rest of it. And the third one? Wood. It's a very good answer. I'm not including wood in this because you can... I'm treating forest as something separate. We'll need to deal with forestry, whether we plant trees or cut them down, as a separate thing. On balance, we should be planting more, but wood's a great answer. That's a lot of Kat's research from last week is on that, and I don't know very much about that. Gas. So gas, it's a big one in the UK. So coal is a big one in China. In the UK, gas is one of the biggest ones, but globally, gas is about 8 billion tonnes. And that's mostly, again, for making electricity, but also for heating, so heating our homes, particularly in the UK. And the last one, it's a big industry, but making cement, 2 billion tonnes, that's a really big deal. Oh, and I forgot to put shipping back on the oil pile. Shipping goes here. So
what was the billion for oil?
It's 15, 11, 8, 2, roughly. So that's
globally?
Yeah, that's globally every year. So 36 billion tonnes. 30 years ago, 1990, when climate change was first becoming a big deal, the emissions were about 23 a year. So we've gone up a lot since then. So that's the bad news. The good news is we look to have peaked. We're still at about 36. We've been roughly about that for the last 3 or 4 years. Went down a bit because of COVID. It's gone back up again. But the big challenge now is how do we get from 36 to 0, and how do we do it quickly?
Sorry, we were 23 when?
1990. So because climate change is often overwhelming to people, I'm going to break it down into how we could do something about it into 6 steps to get it from 36 to 0. I know that some of the things I'm going to say here aren't easy. They won't be easy to do, but I'm just saying this to show that it's technically possible to do it. So the first step is for us all as a society, human global societies, to use less energy. And there's lots of different ways we can use less energy. This room has got about maybe 100 lights in it. We could probably get by with 50 and be equally well lit. We could turn the therm, that would get rid of, I'm going to do a magic disappearing act now. I even brought my washing basket with me to put, it doesn't, they don't all fit. I tried to carry them down the road and it was like that. I had to take this as well. So yeah, using less energy by saving energy like that, turning your thermostat down on your boiler, that would save some energy. If Bradford Council, when it approved planning applications, if instead of doing greenfield developments, it built new housing nearer to railway stations or nearer to the city centre, people would need to drive less. So less energy used, so you'd have less there as well. Some people fly quite a lot. They fly quite long distances. Not everyone by any means. But if you go into Australia twice a year, if you go to Greece once a year instead, you've cut your emissions by about a factor of about 7 or 8. So that would get rid of some as well. Another thing you can do is, second category after using less, is what you do use it efficiently. So I don't know what these lights are, but if they're halogen, you replace them with LEDs. That would save a lot of energy. If you've got to make a journey and you have the option to go by rail or bus or cycle or walking, that's a more efficient way than getting about than going by car. If you do have to use your car, that's fine, but buy a car that's 40 miles per gallon rather than one that's 30 miles a gallon. They can all save lots of energy too. Get an efficient boiler. Another one, when you have to replace your boiler, I know it's an expensive thing to do. I'm not saying that all these things are easy. The really big thing that we can do a lot of is all the energy we do use, as far as possible, turn it from burning fuel into getting that energy from electricity and then making that electricity as green as possible, so wind or solar. Some people advocate nuclear. That's another much lower carbon than coal and oil. So if we replaced, this is a good one, this one, we can replace all the coal-fired power stations with wind and solar and the gas-fired power stations as well. If we switch all the diesel and petrol cars to electric vehicles, that gets rid of that. If we switch the boilers that we've got, the gas boilers, over time, over the next 10 or 15 years when they're replaced, get them replaced with an air source heat pump. Is it electricity? It's more efficient to heat your homes. Doesn't always work for every home, and it is expensive at the minute. But you know, laptops were expensive 15 years ago. Prices do come down. So that gets rid of that. And then we're still left with a fair bit. I think I should take some more coal away. You can do a lot with shutting the coal-fired power stations down. The next step, step 4, is that the fuels that you do use that you can't use electricity for, like ships, for example, you need a pretty long electricity cable across the Indian Ocean to power your ship, use alternative fuels which are lower carbon. So hydrogen, ammonia, biofuels. If you do biofuels right, there's a lot of problems with biofuels. It relates to your tree problem earlier on. We need land and trees for a lot of different things. So biofuels is a bit of a double-edged sword, but you can do a lot with that. So in steel making, instead of using coal, you can use hydrogen. Ships, one of the things I'm looking at is whether you can replace ships' heavy fuel oil with ammonia. And if that works, ammonia is a bit toxic and dangerous, so you've got to do it very carefully. But that could get rid of this. And that leaves you with a very small amount. Cement, I know nothing about cement, I'm really sorry, but there is a process that would get rid of this, just like that. It's called Portland cement, 99% of the emissions go. The remaining stuff, the stuff that's really hard, you would use carbon capture and storage on. So you capture the carbon dioxide in the chimney, take it by pipe, deep out to sea, bury it underground. So that gets rid of the remaining lot. And then you've got some really difficult stuff at the end. And I'm hoping that 25 years from now, when we're almost done the rest of it, we'll have a way of dealing with these. But if we don't, we're still at a very small amount. The way to deal with those is to balance them out. By tree planting is one example, or people are talking about building carbon dioxide removal machines to suck it out of the atmosphere, then bury it deep at sea. It's a bit of a last resort, that one, because as you can imagine, sucking it out of the atmosphere would be stupidly expensive. But this is showing that, in theory, it can be done. We can get from 36 to 0. All the technology is basically there. It doesn't mean that we all have to go back living in caves, as some people might think. It's definitely a doable proposition. It's just about the will, enough people, changes to make the economics work, the costs work, politicians to get behind it, to put these things in place. One of the difficulties for climate change, as I'm sure you'll know, is that the way I've talked about it, this is like dozens and dozens of different things, and you've got to do them all. It's not like one silver bullet, it's lots and lots of different things that you've got to do. So that was my first bit of my talk on what should be done. One of the things, and Kat, again, I can't emphasise this enough, what Kat said last week about this needs to be done quickly. If your tap's overflowing, then you turn the taps off quickly. Sorry, if your bath's overflowing, you turn the taps off quickly. The faster we do this, the lower the temperature rise that we will get. So it's important to do this 36 to 0 as fast as we can. So the next point I wanted to talk about was who's responsible? Is it us? Is it the Chinese? Is it everybody? That's just a summary. I'll put this back up at the end of the 6 steps that I talked about. Sorry, this is one. I've only got 2 graphs. I know people don't like graphs. So this is who are the biggest 6 emitters in the world of that 36 billion. As you can see, the Chinese are top. One good reason for that is that there are 1,400 million of them, so you know, you'd expect them to be doing quite a lot. And the graph that I prefer, the next one, is what is the emissions per person? So this is a very different story. It shows that the Americans are the worst. They're very profligate in the amount of energy they use. They lose a lot of coal, oil and gas. And I want to say a few things about this, because this is about the responsibility. Whose responsibility is it for climate change? You'll see at the bottom, Pakistan, Uganda, lots of other countries in Africa, Southeast Asia, Latin America, who have tiny, tiny emissions. They are not responsible for this. It's the rich, industrialized, developed countries who are responsible mostly. And that's particularly unjust, I think, because it's those countries on the right who are suffering the most from the climate change right now. Everyone knows, they'll have seen it in the news, the horrific floods in Pakistan this last month. An awful lot of stuff that happens in Africa isn't reported at all. But the crop failures and the drought and the floods in Africa right now are shocking, and they have been for years. So they're on the front line, they're not responsible. So I think that the main thing from this graph is that although everybody has to do something about climate change, it's the countries on the left who are most, who need to do the most. And you look at that, you think, UK, that's not bad, is it? We're only just a little bit more than the global average. And it is good. There is a good news story. In the last 10 years in Britain, we've cut our year's emissions by 40%, mostly down to swapping coal power for renewables. We've done quite a lot of energy efficiency because there's lots of, hardly anybody has the horrible incandescent lights, really energy guzzling lights anymore. So we've done a lot. But we're still above the average. And there's 2 or 3 things that make us worse than that looks as well. The firstly is my laptop, this laptop, most of the things that we buy and use in the UK are imported. So, and in the way that emissions are calculated, making that laptop will count to China's emissions, not to the UK's, but really it should probably be me, really. I'm the one who's using it. So that would bring China down and the UK would go up. Flying isn't included in that graph because flying is an international thing. So if you added flying emissions in, because people in Britain on average fly far more than any other country. I think it's more than any other country on the planet. The Brits are worst for, or best, depending if you like flying, but they fly a lot, so that would go up. And the last point is that this is a snapshot of what happened in 2020. And all the climate change that we've had so far is a result of the emissions this year and every other year going backwards in time. So because Britain's gone through a heavily industrialized period with loads of coal and oil and gas use, we are far more responsible for this problem than that graph shows. So to me, and it's part of the international agreements on climate change that have been signed, that the Rio Convention, the Paris Convention, is that countries who are more responsible and more capable, as in they're richer, have a greater responsibility to act faster and deeper than Pakistan and Uganda and Bangladesh. And as a consequence, the UK has signed up. We've got a legal target to cut our emissions to 2050, which is good. I think it should be earlier than that to really reflect the responsibility. But that's what we've agreed to do as the UK. So I'm going to turn down a level now from the global perspective. I'm going to do a Family Fortunes game on you now, because I used to love Family Fortunes in the 80s when I watched it. So on this is the UK's emissions. So the UK, 320 million tonnes a year, every year. It's come down a lot. But what do you think are I think it's the top 11 things that we do that cause carbon emissions here in the UK? Anyone start me off with something? Flying, okay. So I haven't been as precise as you, but all planes, whether they're abroad or not, comes in about 7th. Yeah.
Family Fortunes.
Oh, I thought you meant a sound effect of a plane. Well, it does depend whether you do. Is it Celebrity Family Fortunes or the old one? You know. So planes, that's good. Cars, I think that's. So cars. So the thing about cars is that although we've got lots of electric vehicles right now, there are still an awful lot of very polluting cars on the road, and people are tending to buy big ones, you know, SUVs and things. So although there's some progress, it's all pretty much flat actually. There's not been a lot of progress on cars in the last 10 years or so.
Does that include lorries?
No. No. Oh, very good. I like it. Lorries and vans. So, yeah, increase in van emissions actually, because in the last 5 years since Amazon and all the deliveries and people are getting more deliveries, so van emissions have gone up, just more vans, although they are getting more efficient, and we can do more about lorries these days. They get the pollution down.
Production of electricity. Producing electricity.
That's a good point. So what I've done is producing electricity, I've then added it up to the end use of it. So it's not on here, but you're right, the source of it is important. Yes, I'm going to give you the top mark for that. Ooh. Industry. So everything we make, so from whether it's a brewery or a ceramics factory or steelworks, so all the industry in the UK, it's come down a lot, but it's still the biggest thing. Heating. Heating what? Home heating is second. So the UK has got some of the least energy efficient housing in Europe. It's really quite surprising. I wouldn't have thought that, but apparently it is. It's, you know, even countries which are a lot poorer than us have much better insulated homes than we do, so our emissions are high.
Is that an accident of geography? Perhaps because you ever see TV of Italy, for example, it's a moderate climate.
Yeah.
The buildings are ancient.
Yeah, it's complicated because Denmark and Sweden and Norway and Finland have worse climates than us in lots of ways. They're colder in the winter, but their homes are much better insulated. So I think it is just a lot of.
It's something to do with housing regulations, because most European countries have very, very strict housing regulations on insulation. We don't, because we believe in free market and everybody can do what they like.
Good point.
I've got 3 pals in Norway and they're way more efficient than us lot.
So quickly go through. I'm not sure how much time I've got left, so I'm. 5 minutes to go. Yeah, this is good. Right. Throw some answers out loudly. I won't go through them all. Home electricity. Yes, that is definitely one. Where is it? Oh, it's higher than I remembered. It's here. So this has come down a lot in recent years. That's great. It's come down a lot. It would have been higher before, but home electricity, we've become more efficient in how we use our lighting, and also the electricity we use has become much lower carbon because we've got rid of coal and we've done wind power instead. Agriculture is here. So it would actually, I put a little star behind it because this is just carbon dioxide. If you include other greenhouse gases, then it would go up to 12%, it would be up here. So farming, agriculture is farming, fisheries and forests all together, but that's a good one. One last guess and then I'll just open the other ones up.
Public transport.
Public transport, yes. It's right at the bottom because quite a lot of the rail's electric and buses are pretty efficient and they're going electric too. And the other ones are ASDA, pubs and banks, the commercial sector, and similarly the NHS and schools. So they use a lot of energy and, you know, some of their buildings are quite old, as you know, if you've got a BRI. And the last one, ships, what I work on. So I always have to put ships in there. Ships are great. So that's the national picture. What was I going to say? So finally, I think there's another point to say about who within the UK is doing this, like who has responsibility for all this. For example, you as an individual can't do anything about ships. You as an individual have got some control over your home heating and home electricity, but you don't have total control. You know, if you're on an average income, then you can't really afford an air source heat pump because they cost tens of thousands of pounds. You need government support for that sort of thing. Another aspect of responsibility is, do some people or groups of people consume or pollute more than others? And that is certainly true. So on average, the richest fifth of people in Britain fly 4 times a year, and the poorest fifth of people fly less than once a year. Richest fifth of people travel by car on average 4,000 miles a year. The poorest fifth of people travel 2,000 miles a year, and richer people have bigger cars usually as well. So there are things to be aware of about who's responsible for the emissions, and that's the final thing I want to do is to say a little bit about Shipley and how Shipley might be different. Now, there are a lot of detailed figures about the Shipley area that are very good, so I can only give general things, but because on average Shipley and Bradford are less rich than southern England or the average, then we will have fewer emissions on some things, like we fly less, we buy fewer consumer products, for example. But in other areas, people in Shipley are the same or more. Like everyone's seen the traffic in Shipley and around it.
The shipping thing, everyone buys stuff from Amazon. Everything gets imported by shipping, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. So it's like,
Self-responsible.
it's kind of proportional to your income, isn't it? The more you've got, the more you tend to spend. And the other thing about Shipley, again, is that the housing stock here in Shipley is poorly insulated. Most of us, including me, I live in a, you know, turn of the century terraced house, and it's really difficult to insulate it without spending a lot of money. So in Shipley, the housing stock is hard to heat, so it's expensive to heat, and there's a lot of pollution. So yeah, finally, who's responsible for all of this? Well, you often hear people say it's like, oh, individuals should do it all, or no, it's all the government. And I don't believe it's either of that. I think it's everyone. It's individuals have a role, Bradford Council have a role, businesses like ASDA have a role, the national government certainly has a role. And it will need all 4 of those groups working together, really, to solve a problem as big as this, because there are so many elements of it. So I think what you're doing and what you're doing over the next couple of weeks is deciding what would be a good plan of action for Shipley to take, and I'm totally behind you doing that. And if there's anything I can do to help at all, then just ask me and I'll try and help as best I can. And thank you. Next time I do it, I'll do Family Fortunes music and well, and the buzzers and everything. This is a bit low tech, as you might have gathered.